let's make it 3 things. What are 3 things that, a modern remote asset management system should have?
Yeah, so I think, just kind of creating those kind of core buckets. I think the first is modern technology. I think we can talk more about that. I think the second is we'll call it premium support. And the parentheses here is without a premium price tag. That's kind of an important kind of asterisk on that. And then I think the third is just to have a flexible way to pay.
Awesome. That's interesting too, because only one of those is actually, the technology is actually relating to the components of the system, but we'll talk more about that. But let's start on that. Let's start on, modern technology. Why do systems need modern technology besides the fact that it just seems like the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it boils down to those 4 problems that we discussed. And typically, modern technology, if it's actually modern, it should offer solutions to reduce complexity and cost while increasing your speed and improving your outcomes, your quality.
Gotcha. And so, what, when we say modern technology, what should people look for in a remote asset management system that sort of represents what we mean by that, and without being too specific?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's definitely an expansive list. I think to make it simple, I think the first is low cost is an important part. Global secure communications. It's time to get rid of unlicensed RF networks. The world now is covered in high quality, dedicated, secure networking infrastructure. It's prolific. So I think when we start thinking about how do we kind of achieve this, it's just we don't need to keep building this ourselves. It happened with cloud. It's happened with comms, and that gets into really the second point, which is to have a cloud-based storage and processing infrastructure. It's just simpler. It's easier to maintain, and it's more secure than your local database. We've seen this wave already happen. The cloud has won. It's just like we've talked about. It's simpler. It's easier to maintain, and it's more secure, and more cost effective as well. I think and an important thing here is that we can't forget about being also able to push logic to the edge. The cloud is great, but you don't necessarily want all of your processing power there. So that's just kind of an important thing to keep in mind. And I think the third one is mobility. Everybody is on mobile today. Probably half of the people here today are watching this webinar on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone. But it's not just saying like, okay, we need to have like an app. That's just to kind of view data. That's a very common approach, and that's kind of looking for the kind of a solution, but not the problem. The mobile experience really should be completely ingrained in the actual overall system itself. It should be complementary to that system.
Gotcha. So it's right, like you said, it's not just a mobile app to view data from wherever you are. It's actually, hey, how do I interact with this whole system through a mobile experience? How do I interact with the hardware? How do I interact with my databases and my data and do all of that from a mobile application or a mobile platform? So, okay, so we've covered technology. Let's talk about the next one, which was this premium support without the premium price tag. What do we mean by that?
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, I think this is pretty simple. I mean, we keep coming back to a data-driven culture as kind of a core tenet that any of us would want to have that are looking to pursue a remote asset management system. And so, good support means helping those workers build trust and use the system effectively and efficiently. And so, again, this kind of goes back to the problems we talked about. So, kind of to diagram this out, the upfront expense means that the business leaders or the business unit leaders typically are anxious about the return on investment. And they want to get it as quickly as possible because that makes them feel better, and they're protected from getting chewed out by their boss, which is a natural inclination. But the complexity makes it hard for the workers to adopt the system, the core tenets of how to use it, and then ultimately build that trust. So you end up with this tension between the leadership and the workers, and it is doomed. I mean, I used to sort of run our client success group. I saw this firsthand. It really has doomed many a digital transformation project from the get-go. And I think, great support is what is helping speed that process up and keep workers comfortable. And it gives them the best, it kind of creates the best of both worlds. So your leaders get their ROI and your workers are engaged and happy and utilizing the system and actually realizing, hey, this making my life a heck of a lot better. I'm way more efficient, and I'm actually better at my job. I'm up for that promotion earlier now because I'm achieving those goals faster. You know, I should add that, you know, be wary of premium support with a premium price tag. This is something that is very common, but it ultimately creates yet another barrier that keeps your employees from asking for help, which is not what you want. That's a quick way to erode that data-driven culture that you're trying to get to.
Awesome. That makes sense. I mean, what it comes down to is support is really about giving to trust that data to put marbles in the jar, so to speak. Okay, next one, flexible payment options, or maybe the business model as we talked about it. We talked about how most projects are capital intensive. They put the risk on the customer of building that data-driven culture and achieving the value of the system. If that's kind of the prevailing model right now, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, capital investment it's a huge barrier both to getting started and into upgrading. And, you know, vendors really need to be looking at a way to offer alternatives that take the pressure off that typical heavy upfront investment.
Gotcha. So like just a subscription-based model, is that the solution?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, like that's a component, but it's ultimately, typically it's not quite that simple. So just kind of like, you know, kind of to give color to that, many companies will offer a semblance of a subscription model, but in reality, if you go past page 1 of the price sheet, it's really just a cost plus hardware model with a recurring fee on top of it. So you're still paying up front for hardware, and then the setup, the installation, the licensing, and then on top of that, you're now paying a subscription, which really is just the cost of the comms and the data storage with whatever markup that provider wants to put on it.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's really interesting to kind of talking about that, kind of the cash flow. It's a subscription model may be better for cash flow. It's like taking a mortgage out on your house, but the reality is those inefficient cost structures that we talked about, they still exist, and you're just amortizing them over a time period. So yes, it might be good for cash flow, but honestly, it's just penalizing the customer in the same way. And there probably is, like a mortgage, kind of an interest component to that. So we got to be careful of that. So one of the things we've talked about is being careful about the costs of implementation and upgrade. So a lot of companies that do offer like a subscription-based model or a SaaS-based model, you're still going to be left hanging for the cost of deploying equipment or deploying hardware. And install is the big one, right? Especially with IoT-based systems. IoT devices generally are pretty inexpensive. It's not like OT where you're paying $5,000 for a gateway. You could get a gateway out there for a couple $100. But depending on your environment, the cost to install that actually probably exceeds the cost of the hardware itself. So even if you're amortizing the cost of the hardware, you're paying for it up front, a lot of vendors won't factor in installation. So you're either hiring somebody yourself to do that, or you know you're going to go contract somebody, and that cost is really going to blow up. And then you have maintenance on top of that. So it's not just the initial install; it's maintenance. So